Hello everybody, my name is Alex and I'm the Forest Program Coordinator at Etifor. And together with my colleague Anna, we prepared the second part of the module on financing urban forestry, an introduction to private financing. In the previous lecture, we saw that there are different public instruments for the predominantly public-owned urban forest. However, we know that public funding alone is not enough for achieving the European Union objectives and often suffer from public budget constraints. Therefore, it is fundamental that public authorities try to attract and leverage private resources as well, from a different range of actors: foundations, community, NGOs, and also financial institutions. These actors can jointly finance projects with municipality or also intervene alone, as we will see. The possibility of attracting and leveraging private investments is often hindered by some barriers that have to be taken into consideration, and these are the long-term impact, the public perceived impact of nature-based solution in urban forests, the difficulties in assessing and monetizing possible benefits, the difficulties in calculating possible cash flows and returns on investment, and the lack of business models related to urban forests. So there is a need to foster alternative financing solutions, also through the coordination across public and private financiers. And there are different types of instruments through which public actors can leverage private resources. And this includes market-based instruments such as user charges, taxes, subsidies, tax rebates, trading systems, offsets for residual impacts on biodiversity, green infrastructures, and payment for ecosystem services. But also the development of business improvement district, where businesses and other stakeholders enter an agreement with the local government to contribute an additional levy to finance improvement in a specific area. Also creating public-private partnership, defined as a long-term contract between a private party and a government entity for providing a public asset or service. And finally, endowment funds. But we could also include revolving funds, which is a fund replenished through repayments of the loans drawn from the fund or by a constant flow of financial contributions. Community asset transfers, where local authority may transfer to a community organization the management or ownership of a public land. We could also include regulation and planning standards, although not really a financing instrument as such, but interesting, where local authority can apply regulatory and planning instruments to mandate green infrastructures implementation by private stakeholders. And finally, leveraging existing regulatory obligation. A number of entities with environmental obligation can leverage this requirement to invest in alternative nature-based solutions. Now, for each type of instrument mentioned before, there are some prerequisites and limiting factors that should be considered. And now we are going briefly through them. User charges requires accurate calculations of the fee. Subsidies and tax rebates involve administrative costs and requires monitoring to ensure that those receiving the funds are actually contributing to nature-based solution management. Trading systems requires regulatory changes, and so may be slow to take off. Offsets again requires accurate quantification and robust monitoring and reporting. And finally, payment for ecosystem services schemes presuppose an output-based payment from the municipality. Business improvement districts requires a number of businesses within a certain area that are willing to pay for similar services. In the case of endowment funds, this requires local authority to establish a legal partnership with stakeholders of a board of trustees to manage the endowment fund. So expertise management and initial capital are needed. Public-private partnerships are generally suitable only for projects that deliver an attractive return to a private entity. In the case of community asset transfers, it has to be considered that legal possibility exists in some countries that might not be available in others. And also in this case, there are administrative costs and management skills that are required. In the case of regulation and planning standards, in this case, regulatory changes are required and could be difficult to achieve the cost effectiveness for this instrument. And finally, a prerequisite for leveraging existing regulatory obligation is an existing regulatory or legislative requirement leading to significant expenditure that can be redirected to network-based investment that meet the original requirement. There are also cases, and the number is increasing, in which private actors promote a urban forest initiative without a public nudge. And some examples are grants and donation from private actors, such as NGOs, foundations, but also community and citizens initiatives. Private companies that, as part of their businesses, promote tree planting and reforestation projects, addressing citizens or offering offsetting services to companies interested in corporate social responsibility initiatives, achieving neutralities, and so on. There are also equity investment funds that target companies that promote reforestation interventions. And finally, there are also debt instruments such as green bonds emitted by private companies or private multi-utilities to finance also reforestation projects, even though this is not yet a common option. And I would like to conclude with an example of public-private partnership where Etifor has been involved, and that brings us to Padova, Italy, where this municipality decided to improve city well-being by growing 10,000 new trees in public areas, creating 8 new small urban forests in the city. For doing so, an agreement was signed between the municipality and Etifor, which developed and manages the tree planting and investment platform Wow Nature. Through this platform, companies, associations, and citizens have been involved in the project by giving them the possibility to adopt 1 or more trees. And this allowed the municipality to collect a private co-financing, but also to engage the community in the project. You can find more information on this project by visiting the website that you find here, wownature.eu. So I conclude this lecture and module here. To briefly summarize, in this lecture we have seen an overview of the financing mechanism to foster urban forest and nature-based solution project implementation, both considering public and private resources and possible collaborations among these actors. Thank you very much for listening, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or comments.